And welcome to Litquake, San Francisco's literary festival. I'm Jack Bulworthy, co-founder of Litquake, and we are streaming live from the Bay Area and around the world. That's what it is right now. This is our 21st festival, and our schedule runs through October 24th. You can catch all the details on upcoming events at litquake.org. Tonight, we are very honored to be able to present a Bay Area treasure right here. He lives here in the Bay Area, Obi Kaufman, in conversation with Leslie Carol Roberts. Many thanks to the San Francisco Botanical Garden for helping promote and co-present this event. A few things before we start. Please feel free to, if you have a question you'd like to ask Obi or Leslie, just go down to the bottom of your screen and click the Q&A button and type in your question there, and we'll get to them in the second half of the event. Afterwards, after the event ends, there will be a short survey that pops up on the screen. We would love it if you just took 2 seconds to fill it out. It really helps us find out who you are and what you like, and how we can continue to raise money to do things like this. You can support Obi and Leslie by buying their books. That's first and foremost, really. That's why they write them. Buy their books at your favorite independent bookstore, or you can also find them at our Litquake bookshelf, which is at bookshop.org. Just search for Litquake and you'll find their books, and they will actually be sold through an independent bookstore. We also ask for your support of the Litquake organization to allow us to continue these types of events. We've been doing free online events since April 1st this year, because it's that kind of a year. And everything is free. Netflix costs money, but we're doing it for free. So if you believe in keeping literature and books a key component of San Francisco's cultural landscape, please consider dropping us a few dollars. Every bit helps. You can find us on Venmo or PayPal or directly at litquake.org. So let's get on. Oh, sorry. You can also follow us Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Okay. So let's get on with the show. Tonight, we're celebrating the publication of Obi Kaufman's newest book, The Forests of California. It just came out from Heyday Books right here in the Bay Area. This fully illustrated edition not only guides readers through the Golden State's forested lands, but also presents a profoundly original vision of nature in the 21st century. And if you've ever seen Obi's work before, they're saturated with these signature watercolor paintings and maps and trails, and they're just beautifully done. So I can't wait for you guys to hear what they're going to talk about. So the two people tonight you're going to listen to, Obi Kaufman is a Bay Area author, poet, painter, and naturalist. He grew up here in the East Bay as the son of an astrophysicist and a psychologist. He is the author of 3 illustrated books, which he illustrated himself: The California Field Atlas, The State of Water, Understanding California's Most Precious Resource, and his newest book, The Forests of California. All of the books are published by Heyday, and Obi makes his home base in Oakland, and he's currently working on more books about the state of California. You can follow him on Instagram and at coyoteandthunder.com and californiafieldatlas.com. Obi will be in conversation with an old friend of Litquake's, Leslie Carol Roberts. She is the author of 2 books, Here's Where I Walk, Episodes from a Life in the Forest, and The Entire Earth and Sky, Views on Antarctica. She is the founder of the Eco-Poesis, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, movement, and recently kicked off a new series of conversations with today's most inspiring ecological thinkers for The Believer magazine. She is also chair of the MFA writing program at California College of the Arts in San Francisco, and is a member of the Architectural Ecologies Lab. So please enjoy the event, and please welcome Obi Kaufman and Leslie Roberts.
Thank you, Jack. That was a beautiful introduction. And thank you, Litquake, for having me and Obi here tonight. Me and Obi had a chance to meet prior to this and had a wide-ranging conversation about his beautiful new book. And I just want to begin by saying, making a couple of remarks, and then we'll get into the questions. All field notebooks and atlases are a philosophy. And by how they define the space called field and how they construe the idea of notebook. In Obi's generous new book and gorgeous new book, A Field Atlas to California's Forests, I had this overwhelming sense of falling in idea love with the most compelling ecological brain I've met in years. And so I wanted to begin by asking Obi to talk about some of the language of the book. So you describe your atlas as being concerned with the how of things and as a response to broken world thinking. Let's talk about that.
Yes, let's. Leslie, it's so good to be here with you tonight. Sunday evening, we're talking live. I wonder how this conversation would sound if we did it Monday morning. You know, the energy is a particular way Sunday night. Thank you so much for joining me and having me here, and thanks to Litquake. The how of things, well, that gets exactly to the heart of the character of California that I'm attempting to describe, intending to engage with this lifelong affection that I carry around in my heart for the thing, the super entity, really. You know, I fall I fall easily in love with things. Things and beings, the right turn of phrase, the right light across maybe a toothy bit of watercolor paper. That kind of stuff sends me, you know, hours long, frenzied swooning, ready to go. I've always been this way. It's a matter of me engaging positively with, you know, this world of many sorrows, if you will. It's an energy delegation. It's a warm light. It also can be an arc welder. You know, it's very intense. It's how I wake up every morning before dawn and looking to get in front of that energy. And then, you know, by the end of the day, I collapse into bed exhausted, having failed once again in this joyful and ultimately futile dance to get ever closer to the heart of this thing. I'm not really concerned with the what of things. That's what, to answer your question directly, I'm not interested in making field guides. That's why I use the word atlas, and I use that very simply. You know, you'd think an atlas would describe the where of things, you know, and I don't do that either, which is funny for a thing calling itself an atlas. So I put the qualitative word field in there, what the field might be. You know, what the field is not only a physical geographic area, but it's also an area of thought. It could be either the picture plane, which is the field, right? When I'm engaging as an illustrator, it could be the poetic space where language can dilate and words, even like the most simple words, can sort of grow inside of or outside the bounds of their normal rigid definitions to translate a deeper meaning of things, which is of course in this desperate hour here in the 21st century, a worthwhile endeavor, I'd imagine.
Yeah, no, quite so. I mean, so you also talk about how in the book, in the Atlas, how when artists and scientists come to ecologies with an invested passion, that it becomes sublime. And then you propose that this interdisciplinary collaboration allows for a more delicate communication from the more than human world. And I'd love to talk about that word delicate and also the idea of the sublime.
Well, I think that theory, that idea of the unity of all knowledge, which, like, you know, thinkers like one of the watershed books in my life would be like E.O. Wilson's Consilience, the unity of all knowledge, where you have these two paths to this idea called truth, where you have the humanities on one side and you have the sciences on the other. You know, sciences is the sword from the stone that we pulled ultimately towards this idea of physical truth, objective truth, or at least objective truth in the physical sciences. I mean, there's other truths another sort of father figure in my life, I imagine, would be like a Neil deGrasse Tyson, who says there's three truths. You know, there's physical, there's personal, and there's political truths. And I would like to talk about all of them at once. The arts puts us in an evolutionary field of history, right? Where the arts is the one thing we have as humans. Like when the aliens come down, right? When the aliens come down, they will have already had all the sciences figured out. They're not coming for our sciences. They're coming to learn about what makes us unique in all of the universe, which is like this one pale blue dot, you know, that we've got here, that made this mind happen, that it allows us to engage uniquely in our own in that field of history I'm talking about. And so and it goes from the past, but it also goes towards the future. And I believe that merging those two things is a way through possibly this bottleneck that we are all so terribly engaged in right now, towards the idea of truth on one hand, meaning on the other. It's a very simplistic way of framing it, but I think that there is good philosophical ground there.
Yeah, no, I completely concur with that. And I think it's fantastic that you're casting your mind back to consilience and E.O. Wilson's thought. I think that sort of leads me into the next question I have, which is you like this word connectivity and calling it a form of communication and the survival strategy of reinforcing connectivity between humans and more than humans. Another term I want us to sit with, you know, but also you emphasize it's connectivity with more than humans and equally connectivity amongst humans. And so, and the book very much, you know, articulates that in a very consistent, you know, cadence across the 9 sections. So I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's several different ways that I would like to approach that. I mean, my second book, The State of Water, Understanding California's Most Precious Resource, was not about what I thought it was about ultimately. You know, and I came across this revelation. Perhaps you've had this experience as an author yourself, where like the books having birthed themselves into this world, you know, and that gets to this whole other like temporal idea, like did the subject matter use me to make it? We'll talk about that a little bit more too. Like what is the me that is making this book? Where does it exist? But the book, the body of the work continues on as its own being after it is created, and its meaning begins to shift. For example, The State of Water, the subtitle of which is Understanding California's Most Precious Resource. I had come up with that subtitle thinking quite plainly that it was, you know, in fact, the substance itself, water, you know, the thing that I turn on from the tap that, you know, upon which all life, you know, resides and needs, operates. But I realize, of course, that after touring the book for a year or whatever, that it wasn't water that is our most precious resource. Our most precious resource is the ability to connect with one another in a way that is trusting that truth is being told. And in this incredibly splintered, divisive moment when we are being sold all of this rhetoric about how different we are, you know, on whatever scale of relationship between whatever agenda, which mostly comes from some sort of corporate entity that has no interest in justice, for example, that we are you know, whittled down to this fine little silver dot of truth, trust, and hope. So that's a very like semantic, like what is the necessary like preciousness of and the rarity of connectivity between modern humans in this century, especially at a moment when the decisions we're making right now over the next couple of decades will decide how the next several centuries are going to look for the human ecology and the more than human ecology. Now, I also use the word connectivity very, very simply as like, the space, how habitat spaces are linked, which we're seeing more and more of when we're talking about, for example, and I do a lot of this, discussing conservation policy going into the last half of the 21st century and into the 22nd century. Like, what does 22nd century conservation policy in California look like? And that is a discussion we need to be having right now based on what we've learned about 20th century conservation policy, which is mostly the realm that we all inhabit now. We are inside of still a 20th century policy towards conservation of land spaces and of species and of all of these other things, like specifically air and water. There was a particular moment in the early 70s called the golden age of environmental legislation, right? Where we had all of these wonderful laws passed. It started like 64 with the Federal Wilderness Act, and then up through like the Endangered Species Act of 1973. And we're still dealing with all these things. So you can even go back further, of course, to like national parks, like the whole idea of like drawing a circle around a place and calling that a park. But what we're seeing now, what ecological science is revealing to us, is that those park spaces are becoming ostensible islands of extinction, if you will, where we're not securing the quality and the variety of the habitat spaces, the connective tissue, really, between these larger protected designated areas. And most of them are along like water courses inside watersheds. One of the great things that has happened is, of course, the advent of the land trust movement, which is filling in a lot of these negative spaces across California to the tune of about 3 million acres at this point, which is a good number, which is a good start, right? Land trusts have really taken off in the past 20 years. And I think that the invention of the conservation easement being this thing between public and private policy is a path forward to a larger world of redefining and reorganizing what the restoration industry might look like as a viable business model towards environmental justice, racial justice, economic justice, all of these great things that are on our horizon. And it is because of this emerging science, the quality of the data that we're finally realizing and getting from a network of engaged and supported scientists across the state, beginning at the highest level from, the governor's office itself. We are coming up with good carbon plans and in fact, this new idea of getting to neutral by 2045, which is the idea that we've gotten into this situation from intention. We can get out of this situation with that same engine of intention. Now, I'm not like sitting here like being yay government, like go, Newsom administration, go anybody's, it has to come from market forces that are from bottom up, and the voters have voted for it. We've got incredible initiatives that have freed up all of this money to really establish this new industry of getting back into the forest. There's perhaps I've gone off the rails here, Leslie, but it's really easy for me to slide between the philosophical and the political, the economic, I more and more I'm just thinking that it's all a network of justice, and all boats rising together on that on that idea of the emergence of justice is what fills me with not only hope. Hope is an actionable tool, but optimism towards there actually being a heading in what might otherwise be, from many different perspectives, an entire realm of chaos. So to get back to your question about like how we engage this idea of the more than human world across, but in a popularized context, I mean, I would hope that my work is all about the idea of this geographic literacy being this tool for the citizenry to be engaged with their own environment, to finally be from California. I am from California, and it is here where I am digging into my responsibility, and it is here that my grandkids will know a intact ecosystem. And that's a very inspiring thought, and you know, I'm inviting you all to come along with me.
Yeah, gosh, that's just beautiful. And you know, yesterday when we were talking about how you collect your thoughts and organize your research to create, you know, the atlas, and then there are two more in the series. We discussed that. You're also doing one about California coasts and also about California's deserts. But you were talking about how, you know, there's a sort of a ton of philosophical and you know, a ton of philosophy and ontological thought, and you know, and digging into this idea of how do we know things. And I think both of us coming to science, we both write about science from the perspective of either the arts and the humanities. And I know there are many people joining us tonight who are writers who are thinking about how do we deputize ourselves, and we meaning all of us, to have a voice in these conversations. And so one of the things you mentioned, and I think that I'd love to hear you talk about this, is how you've deputized yourself to be comfortable with authoritative research and then develop this geographic literacy that an atlas requires. And you talked about it being like a magic well where you just keep boring down to a specific knowledge. And I think, as I said, I think everyone joining us here tonight would really enjoy or learn or feel nourished by your thoughts about that deputization and how you go about this work.
Right. Yeah. You know, at the beginning of that, thank you for that very considerate question. At the beginning of this presentation here tonight, Jack introduced me, and he had that list of things, right? The painter and the poet and the naturalist, whatever. Though, you know, I also really I'm happy to wear those hats. You know, if the shoe fits, you know, I'm happy to wear whatever hat I need to wear in order to tell the story that I want to tell. And I've been very, very intentional over the past few years to really develop this sort of defensible space, if you will. You know, that's sort of borrowing a word from, you know, fire policy or fire guidelines around a piece of property. You have this defensible space. So who am I? What is the voice that I'm speaking with? How do I best crystallize that in order to hand it to you? You know, this story, this thing, this piece of me, and ask you to trust it as a storyteller. You know, the first book, the California Field Atlas, like that was that came out of a real murky part of my heart, from a deep understanding that was, you know, like it was my heart, it was my mind, it was also my feet. You know, I'm a backpacker. I've I've backpacked thousands of miles in this state, and I have this relationship to it, and I wanted to express this character that I wasn't seeing anywhere else. And it's not a, like we're getting back to the how of things or the where of things. Like I'm not telling you how to get anywhere. I'm like, some of the first maps I made for the California Field Atlas were like the 10 peaks of San Gorgonio in Southern California, and just realizing that most mountains don't actually exist as a single peak. They operate in this varied landscapes of elevation and orogeny, like how mountains are formed. And that is and just like that little perspective shift spawned in my mind 1,000 other maps to come, or the 5 sacred peaks of the Bay Area. You can sort of draw a star between them around the bay in the way that it's organized geologically, and that gave me this inspiration to keep going with that. You said the magic well, that idea of like if I could, if you just you're taking drinks of water, and the more water you drink, the more water there is in the well. It's that deep, robust, beautiful, and romantic that I can just like make a map a day for the rest of my life and never tell the whole story. I can make 100 maps a day for the rest of my life and never tell the whole story that I wanted to tell. So there's this license that I carry around as an artist that I wouldn't be able to carry around if I called myself a scientist. You'll note that my list did not have that word on it, right? I am very sensitive to the sciences. I grew up with Dr. Kaufman's son was going to be a mathematician, and I grew up with that, like the big stack of white paper, sharp Canon number 2s, and calculus for hours. That was how I studied. And I went to college and down at Santa Barbara, and had my spirit and mind cracked open by the Chumash rock art of the Santa Ynez Mountains and beyond. And that really inspired in me like this other way of like, here I was looking at these gorgeous big 500-year-old rock paintings and imagining, or relating to, it was deeper than imagining, relating to an artist making a presentation for their community about engaging in the natural world based upon our collective, sophisticated lexicon of deep cultural symbols in order to help the community, right? So that I take inspiration from that is my course, that is then and you can only do that as an artist. Like, I'm not going to leave you alone with all of these facts and figures. I mean, there are a lot of facts and figures. I make big sprawling books on nature. Forest of California comes in at 650 pages, and the last 50 something pages are just all sites and sources from good old like scientific data driven sites like NOAA and USGS and US Forest Service and those kind of things. So you can find most of those maps there, but those maps are not for you. These maps I make are for you and for me, so we can figure this out together. Mm-hmm. And that's also why I'm like really hesitate for like, I know there's some like junior colleges around and stuff who have suggested and asked me and approached me about like using this book as a textbook. Mm-hmm. And I haven't found a curriculum, any sort of course abstract that would satisfy me in this, because this is not a textbook. This is full of me. This is full of it's not good enough for the scientific. It's not good enough for a student of science, because again, I do not leave you alone with these facts. I am coming to you with all of this other potentially treacherous subjectivity, and I'm not inviting you a lot to make your own to come to your own ideas about it, because I've already because this is the result of my conclusions. Okay, so this is this push and this pull, because I also want to invite and expose what an exciting time it is to be a student of ecology. We are learning so much right now in science, right? If you want to be an artist, go be an artist. But if you want to be, but please, we need more scientists. we need more scientists, because there is so much to learn. What we don't know dwarfs what we do. And so I would hope that this license that I have as an artist is just to penetrate that mysterium, really, between the expertise and the popularized communication of these very complex and very important subjects.
Yeah, no, I hear so much what you're saying. I mean, I definitely think you're part of the the lineage that the citizen scientist lineage that you can see very clearly in the mid to late 19th century, when, as people had more free time, learned people were, encouraged to go out and look around and see what they see. In the US, we saw that in like Henry David Thoreau and Emerson and that group. In the UK, it was like, the Vicars were all keeping field notes. The Antarctic explorers, they always brought artists with them to record the look of the place, not just by photography, but also through the hand. So I feel as though you're bringing into sharp relief in a modern context the agency each of us can have within the context of our ecologies. And I did want to, I love what you were saying about this isn't a textbook, but then you also mentioned that, because there's a subjectivity to your lens, but as we know, there's a huge subjectivity to textbooks, right? Just in what they leave out, right? Who gets to be in there making their claims of things, right? So,
right,
I mean,
right.
I think one of the things that might be really fun to do now, I know you're kind of queued up for a screen share. I'm wondering if maybe you could show some of the ways that you draw into as a, artist, citizen scientist, as a human living in this place we called California, how you as Emerson said, the big eyeball, how you become the big eyeball for us, absorbing all of this, and then what you decide to show us.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I'm opening the program right now.
Cool.
Yeah, we would hope, of course, that that the culture of science would be more pristine than it is, right?
Although, I have to say, I think we were talking about this. So I was a Fulbright Fellow at Gateway Antarctica in New Zealand. And the scientists I worked with there were my most generous colleagues. And this isn't to like diss the English department there, but the scientists were far more fascinated by how does somebody who writes creative nonfiction and takes photographs of a place make sense of a place in a way that we don't. So I think, I'm sure.
Yeah, on that sort of like personal intellectual relationship, I'm absolutely on board with exactly what you're talking. Like, I mean, science is science is the way. We have to support. I mean, it's the way towards. The word I keep tossing around so flippantly, but I don't mean it flippantly at all, which is justice. Which this is the great tool that we have, and it's a basket big enough for all of this philosophy to eventually come towards. I would love it if there was some sort of like discernible analytic methodology that my own vocation could transcend, or aspire to, I should say, that was beyond sort of realm of just sort of critical theory, which I think, I potentially sort of bogged down by, like, but, I mean, I can barely manage these hypotheses, let alone come up with experiments towards them, So I'm very happy to talk about a particular quality of California that is, to my eye, having always existed, or at least, in the past 6 to 8 million years since the Middle Miocene, when California began to resemble its current tectonic configuration.
Mm-hmm.
The California current began to establish itself from Alaska southward, that brought with it the Mediterranean climate that we now enjoy, with its cool, damp winters and its hot, dry summers. And so like this slide that you're looking at now, where you have the Yuba River, that blue line there that has been flowing down the west slope of the Sierra Nevada, one of many such east-west rivers across that sort of ladder up the Sierra Nevada that bring the human world all of its water. The Yuba, that water has been flowing there for that long, 6 million years. And it will flow there. See, this is the crossover towards like what continues to be and what really shall be still long after all of the so successfully implemented human infrastructure has returned to the dust from which it is made. And that's what the map on the right side is there. In the next 10 million years, when the peninsula of Baja becomes the island of Baja and moves north on the conveyor belt that is the San Andreas Fault, towards becoming ultimately a suburb of the archipelago of San Francisco, which will be in that time. And then, as we are now dealing with the trauma and the realization that in fact we are in this bottleneck that is the 6th mass extinction, potentially. Mm-hmm. The data's still out, but it looks that way. Mm-hmm. And that in 10 million years, as the biosphere is recovering from the 6th and already dreaming about what the 7th mass extinction might look like, and that will be several tens of millions of years ahead of then even, I wonder what kind of new life will have been invented and what kind of diversity will be on that Baja, on the island of Baja in 10 million years, when the map looks like that, when we are when we see, now that we know how island biogeography works and how and why biodiversity happens in concentrated moments, geographic moments on planet Earth. I mean, we are on one right now in the California floristic province with its world-class, elite class of biodiversity. That is all still here. That's the thing. It's not gone yet. As long as there's time, there's hope. And that is the thought, as I alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, that gets me up in the morning and keeps me going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, your very sort of vibrant optimism definitely comes through on every page of the book. Between your beautiful paintings and the beautiful use of language. And I have to say, it's I really appreciated that. I mean, I'd read your other 2 books, but I really appreciated, particularly in these times where I feel, we're inundated by elements of rage and, horrors, that you're presenting another philosophical space for people to occupy it. And as you discussed, it's not a Pollyanna space. It's a legit moment of a lens on the world that sees all that's here and is thinking dynamically about what do we do moving forward. And so with that, I know we want to start taking some questions soon, but before we go to the questions, and just so everyone knows, Obi and I decided that we wanted to talk about fires, but we didn't want to start with fire. There's a beautiful section in the Atlas that gives a very succinct history of fire management in California. And one of the things that we talked about was how forest policy has largely been dictated by the logging industry. And I wondered if you want to talk a little bit about that, and then we can, I'll start pulling up some questions and we can see what people want to hear about.
Oh yes, it's all connected, isn't it, Leslie? When we start pulling up one half of the net, we have to bring up the other half too. Of course, yes. Certainly, business interests have long and still continue to dictate, market forces dictate what policy actually is, and some bad science too. You know, I imagine. Well, let's talk about optimism for a second. And because that's important, because it's important to know what optimism is, like to really it's facing this data, right? It's not idealism. It is a resignation to there being no other choice. Okay, we have to figure this out, and human beings are very good at figuring this out. Do not bet against the human being. Forward into unity with a sense of justice means also confronting injustices that were done in, you know, the recent field of history. It's really fascinating to me to always think about, like, wow, it's only been 170 years since that guy found that pretty rock in that river, you know, by the state's capital. And how much we've transformed the natural world since then will only be matched by how it again transforms over the next 170 years, you know. And we have to avoid that apocalyptic language. It's like every generation invents some sort of apocalypse for themselves. And most of my friends who are eating themselves alive with anxiety, with hopelessness, with desperation, you know, like you can feel it, you can taste it. They have this, but that too is some sort of projection. Like I think of based on bad science. Do not commit things to the void that are still here. You know, how do we witness this miracle? How do we engage this miracle? You know, getting the best data we can is important past the economics of it, which is going to be the real trick. Like I think of just for an example of bad science, right? Mm-hmm. Saying that the apocalypse is already, like saying that it's unavoidable at this point is bad science. Mm-hmm. But we are replete with ideas of bad science. I imagine Gifford Pinchot, the first director of the U.S. Forest Service, like he learning forestry, this very new science at the beginning of the 20th century. Forestry, like I learned this stuff in Europe where they don't have forest fires. Well, it's a completely different ecosystem. Like he really thought that if you just suppressed fire enough, if you just suppressed fire enough, that it would go away. Mm-hmm. Like that was the way that you solved the fire problem. And he said this explicitly. Mm-hmm. And I mean, looking back at that now, it's laughable. But I also think, like, gosh, I wonder what's happening now with all of us who are, and this is just to get a little bit existential, but I think it's an important point that needs to be made, especially in relationship to that idea of fire policy, especially as a Californian, as you know, growing up in the last half of the 20th century when we were told that just a little bit more chemistry and you'll be able to live forever, you know? And now we're all sort of 20 years into the 21st century and in the era of mega fires and we're all getting old. It's like, oh man, that wasn't a truism either. That was bad science. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're all coming to grips with our own personal apocalypse. Right. While we're engaging and projecting this other apocalypse onto the planet. I mean, it is a moment of singular anxiety, and that's true. But recognizing the miracle, recognizing that although everything's threatened and endangered, it is all still here, and that there is time. We have a plan. Get engaged with that plan. Get it right in your own heart, and fight for, you know, dig into this idea of justice across the board. And if we do that, if we just teeter the momentum in this very complex system towards this emergence of like a catastrophic success, like all of a sudden it falls not towards failure, but towards success, is not only a good idea, it's a responsibility.
Right.
So that almost turned into a rant there for a little bit, but you know, I feel like
it was so beautiful. Let's wrap it up. Okay. So I'm going to take a look at the questions here, and I will read you some. And let's have a look.
I love that we haven't talked about fire or COVID yet. You know, like,
we haven't gotten to Mars. But I think we did a good job.
Mars. Oh yeah, like we're all gonna move to Mars now. No, but
right.
we're addressing the you know the causal root of these things. Climate change is not the enemy.
Right.
Injustice is the enemy. Like that's a very interesting point. You know, like that's a symptom towards the way that we thought we should do things.
Yeah, I mean, I founded that eco-priestess movement with two architects, Adam Marcus and Chris Falyers, who I work with at California College of the Arts.
Oh, right.
And one of the things that we talk about a lot is these instantiated, like people think, oh, it's ecological, so we're thinking about, you know, so-called nature. But the reality it is we're thinking about how we communicate about these instantiated systems that allow the destruction of ecologies to occur. And that includes racism and misogyny and neoliberal capitalism. So yeah, right on. I just so completely concur with that. Okay, so
that's gonna take more than an hour to unpack for sure. But I think
back to bring us back. So Julie Mazzina says, I loved Obi's phrase, network of justice. Can you speak to what that looks like in terms of the push and pull of the need to protect our environment and the need for accessible and affordable housing in California?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's different, I almost see like nested concentric circles, like the one I have in the forest about like the tree associations with the habitats of the forest. Like you can talk about the ethics of justice in terms almost of in a spatial context like that, where you're talking about the drivers of economics and racial history, both past and future. When you start to incorporate ideas of looking at, for example, history over the past 100 years, and perhaps even associating things like fire policy with colonialist violence towards Native Californians and Indigenous California populations over the past 400 or 500 years even. So like we have, there's a shifting of perspective here. And as I was saying before about this emergence of like this emergence of this complex landscape of variables within this very complex society, as we are thinking about what the next chapter of humanity is going to be, because in the words of the immortal Joan Didion, the center will not hold. We are thinking. I'm thinking. I'm seeing. I'm realizing that as we move past from this industrial age, right? This whole system built on the fossil fuels, the fossil fuel of things, built on fuel from the Carboniferous era. As we're moving past that, and we're seeing this slipping of the paradigm where that is not working for us anymore. And it tumbles together very quickly as paradigms shift. You think of the cognitive evolution that happened 100,000 years ago when we invented fiction, when we invented art. Think of the agricultural revolution. Think of the industrial revolution. There might be a fourth paradigm that we wake up in, and it might not just be probable, it might be inevitable that this is an ecological time coming forward where we are completely rejecting the linear economy, where we extract things from the ground and make garbage out of them, to a circular economy where all manner of production is built within a usable cycle of production and remaking. So you begin to approach things like, well, you begin to say real world things like, why don't we have a union for restorationists? How about that? Like, I know there's a lot of like organized labor. There's a lot of problem in the restoration industry right now because the guy in the tractor, in the backhoe, who's doing the river restoration from the tractor can't get out of the tractor and pick up a shovel because they're in because the guy who does that is in a different union. There are some basic labor problems. We're having this problem up at the Klamath River with the dam removal right now because we are stuck in our brains about who's going to be responsible for, fiscally responsible for when that river does flood and floods everybody out south of the river. Everybody, there's a few farms who are really vocal about it. It's an incredibly complex and dynamic negotiation, but it's all just a negotiation. All of that stuff is just us figuring it out. And I'm here not to make an argument one way or another. I'm not here to be a lawyer. I'm not here to be a politician. I'm here to be a storyteller. I think that's the only way that people's minds change. And I think that I just want to build this new story with you to describe how beautiful the future can be. And the future is actually right now. Like, it's not about waiting. It's certainly not about hoping in the sense that like, I hope it's going to rain. That hope is useless. I'm talking about hope that's like actionable, like a tool, like a thing, like I am going to work for this.
Mm-hmm.
Come work with me.
Yeah. No, beautiful. So the next question comes from Hillary Hodge. It's a little long, but I will go ahead and I'll read the whole.
Oh, I know Hillary. Hillary's great. She's a city council person up in Nevada County.
There you go.
Yeah.
So maps are subject to artistic interpretation. In a recent talk with Tuleome, am I pronouncing that correctly? Obi touched on how artistic aesthetics can shape a map's message. For example, a developer might downplay a vulnerable area by rendering it in light colors. I'm an elected official, and I would like to hear from Obi about how to read an artistic interpretation of mapping without bias. Is there a way to approach the rendering of maps without bias?
No, there is such power there. You were talking about the implicitness of bias within the textbook system. Like it is the art and delicate dance that is cartography is necessarily the play of power in the field of history, right? And I'm very comfortable with this because I'm a painter. I'm telling you how your eye should move around the page. I'm telling you what's important to look at. I am absolutely naming these priorities. And so when you think that it would be just easy just to present the data, but what is the story you want to tell? Like, I have to say that, like, I thought of I always think of my books as done before I start them. And I almost like work backwards from that. And I have to trust this creative content building process, which is always tempered by a much more dramatic and terrible editing process. Someday I'm going to like be able to, it's probably going to be posthumously published if it is going to be at all, but like the annotated unabridged version of the California Field Atlas, and it's going to be over 1,000 pages. It's huge. I've got boxes of maps, and thank goodness for a good editor, right? The editor is always the one who can rein you in, rake out that which is superfluous and unnecessary. And the author often can't, or at least I can't. Like the editing process is more important often than the content creation process. And I am so happy to have experienced such a knowledgeable, experienced crew that is Heyday Publishing, my publisher out of Berkeley that's been publishing books for 40 years. And one of the things that Heyday started, Malcolm Margolin started it in the early 70s when he wrote The Ohlone Way. Mm-hmm. Here's this, white guy from Boston coming out writing really what is the definitive book on Bay Area Native culture as yet, and that negotiation, that engagement, that wholehearted loving participation and really wanting to get the story right has certainly been a North Star for me, and always just trying to really just tell my story, whatever that story is, and not, you won't find too much human ecology in my work. I would love to have had maps of indigenous California, for example, mm-hmm. but that's not my story to tell. So knowing when not to exercise this power I've, sort of this mantle that I've taken up, this torch that I'm running with, knowing when to put all that down, and just all you've got is what Obi. And so that's a thing that I wrestle with a lot. And that's also why there's not a lot of sites and sources and endnotes at the end of the California Field Atlas, my first book, and why there's a ton of them in my next book, that sort of that back and forth with my relationship to information at all.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting what you just said though about whose story is it to tell, because one of the criticisms I've received around my book Here Is Where I Walk, Episodes from Our Life in the Forest, which recounts over a dozen years of walks I've taken living in this national park called the Presidio, was why didn't I tell the stories of the people who lived here, the humans who lived here prior to 1776, which is when, right. And I've always answered it the exact same way. And it's partially informed by my time in New Zealand and strong Maori feelings about mm-hmm. who is entitled to tell a story. So I really appreciate what you just said. And I'm sure for all the writers here tonight, it's going to be very inspiring, right?
Very good. Yeah, just tell your story. Don't even if it feels like you're telling somebody else's story, stop immediately. Mm-hmm. Stop immediately, walk away, put down the pen for at least a day, or the keyboard, or whatever you do. It's really at this point, I'm well into the manuscript making process right now of my next book, The Coasts of California, which will be here next year, which is a really heart-wrenching subject right now, knowing what I know about climate breakdown and about the nature of access and the nature of justice and the nature of connectivity and the nature of so many potentially destructive forces that are also creative forces. But I find that when I'm writing and things are going slowly, or I'm having a hard time with the paragraph, what's happening is that this is the story that I'm supposed to be telling. When I'm in it, when I'm in the trench and things are flowing, that's when it's good. And trusting that, stop, this isn't right. It's actually very, very, very akin to painting. For me, well, everything's all the disciplines, all the media are very similar to me. If I'm making a painting and it's been more than 10 minutes, the painting probably sucks. My best paintings are just it's just a matter of breathing. It's like a yoga posture, and then it's done, and if you're working too hard, something's not right. Mm-hmm. There's a little creative insight, I guess, into my own process.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Aliska Myers wants to know, how do all the recent fires and burning in California integrate into your work?
Seamlessly. They were this era of mega fire. It's huge. I mean, we're all reeling from the trauma right now of 1/3 of the total land area that's burned over the past 100 years has burned in the past 10 weeks. It's like, wait, what? I mean, it's shattering. It's like, it's Ahab watching, or Ishmael seeing the white whale for the first time, and it's like reality outruns apprehension, I think is Melville's line. You know, what do we do with that? Well, it was all entirely predictable and predicted. So that's one way to think of it. The other way to think of it is wait till 2021. You might not have seen anything yet.
Right.
This 2020, people are like, oh God, 2020 is such a terrible year. It's like, well, it might all just be training for next year. Like, let us get grounded, get centered, be unpanicked towards all the training that we've been through. Like, the next few years are going to be tough on California's ecology, but what is happening is an opportunity for us to transform and reset with it. Okay, so fire exists inside of California ecology as a clock, inside of this adaptive cycle of release of energy, like it does in all living systems. And there's a great reset happening now. Mm-hmm. There's a great reset happening now. I think that'll be my last sentence in that paragraph.
No, I think that's important. It's interesting to me. So many people talk about they can't wait for 2020 to be over, right? And I think there are many pointers towards 2021 that are suggesting exactly what you're saying, which is that,
it's so true.
Yeah. So we have to be sort of mentally strong and spiritually strong. And speaking of spiritual, Leslie Gordon wants to know if you are a transcendentalist.
I think my dog is. That's not a word that I normally go for. Because I mean that word for me is wrapped up in a certain romantic quality of perhaps not seeing and not relating to the that's not my story of California. It's not my relationship with this place, with the mind of California. You know, I've got too much like modern ecology in my head to think about transcendentalism in that regard. Because I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no because again, it's like that optimism rooted in the reality of the emergency and the direness of our situation. It seems like an indulgence to me, right? Now, that being said, there is a lot to talk about in aesthetic theory, especially like the philosophy of like James Joyce, who I'll read James Joyce before I'm spending much time with Thoreau even, who, you know, because that's a quality of thought, of philosophy that is, I think, a bit more realized, in fact, thought through, as opposed to being lost in the swoon. It is important to come down, get the work done, and keep pushing through that. Mm-hmm. That's another giant word to unpack, transcendentalism, because we have to go back and talk about the history and exactly what that movement was responding to.
Right, and they were, you know what a lot of people don't like when they think about Thoreau and Emerson and, you know, Bronson Alcott and the woods, the forests of the Northeast were already gone. Right. So this idea of going out like to Wohlleben Pond, it was a bit of it was a fantasy of sorts because everything had been removed, right? It had all been felled, right? So it was a very, I don't know. I mean, I think a very different perspective than the one we have here in California, where there still are, because of protections and things like that, pretty, vast wildernesses here that, one can begin to sort of delve into. And you were saying, I mean, along those lines, you were talking about how much time you just spend out on the trail and how much time you spend in the forest. And at one point you mentioned to me that when you're out there, that you were in the forest and the forest is in you. And could you talk about that a little bit? I think that's a fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I wonder, this gets to some of the very best ideas I would say I have in my books, and the overarching like ideas of engaging with the more than human world that I'd like to confront. Maybe on, how do we read the semiotics of the forest? What are the signals they are giving to us? As I am learning, walking through the forest, every hour spent hiking is an hour spent learning. I am taking in like this mycorrhizal air, right? Like the soil itself is alive. 40% of it is made out of this fungal stuff that connects all the trees, that makes one great, perhaps even sentient thing out of the forest, a being out of the forest, a presence that as I breathe it in, and that mycorrhizae, those, quite literally, those aromatic living spores that you can feel when your eyes dilate a little bit, and a fresh dose of forest bathing, right? When you're cleansed again in the woods, that's real. That's physiological. That's not something that is imagined. Although we're plugged in, we have this sense of ecstasy there, which is so necessary and probably the best thing you can do to help out our beleaguered worldview. Get out there and find that as soon as you can, regularly and often. Put your feet in the cold water of the Yuba River and be still and grounded, and think, of course, of that story you're being told then by the being, the mind of the forest, and what is our responsibility then to it. Might we recognize the watershed as a legal personhood someday, as so many there are indigenous cultures all over the world that are getting this into the minds of parliamentary systems, legal, legislatively enacting this idea of personhood to natural constructs, networks. And boy, is California primed and ready for that. So what emerges, of course, is this whole network of responsibilities towards all of the rights. For every responsibility for every right we enjoy, there's a corresponding responsibility that we have to attend to. And it's very clear when you begin to open up in this way to the more than human world that extends in all directions through you, above you, and beside you.
Yeah, beautiful. And so we've got a few minutes left here.
Okay.
And I'm thinking maybe it would be lovely, but feel free to point us in a different direction, Obi. But I'm thinking maybe it would be lovely for you to tell people what's on your nightstand. Who are you reading now, and what's inspiring you or nourishing you as a reader? Because you read a lot.
I do. I think it's necessary. I think as a writer, as a creative person, you should be reading as much as you're writing. For me, it's like really a one-to-one kind of thing. So. I've been reading this great book called Here's Where I Walk. Leslie Carroll Roberts. That's been pretty great. I'm gonna reach over. I've got lots of field guides on my my book stand right now. What else have I got? I've got. Well, I was just we were talking about this. You were asking me about this question yesterday, and I'll just rattle off a couple of ones that I'm really enjoying, and they happen to be all by female authors. Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything. She's got a new one out too, which is amazing. We've got Terry Tempest Williams' Hour of Land. Mm-hmm. Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass is a book that has shaken me down to the core. Well, much in the same ways that like Richard Powers' The Overstory, that did that too. First time I've wept at a novel in quite a while. What is the forest? He and the forest of our own memory, mm-hmm. And our own personal narrative. He incredibly adept at describing that. Ursula Le Guin, Left Hand of Darkness. I just started making my way again through that book because I've got so much like Frank Herbert in my brain right now because that Dune movie was supposed to be coming out this year. I hear it's going to be delayed, but I was really excited for that Dune movie because I was really influenced by that sort of, science fiction as a younger kid, and still am. Mm-hmm. But remembering what a brilliant writer she was and is. Mm-hmm. Got a couple of Rebecca Solnit's on my nightstand. Savage Dreams was a earlier book of hers that I'm making my way through again. That's amazing. One of my favorites is David Rains Wallace, and he wrote The Articulate Earth, which is eco-criticism, as he calls it, which is a fantastic analysis and investigation of environmental movements around the world and here at home too. And he has this great sort of mythic ability to really present this epic narrative that gets me swept away real easily. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we can go on.
And there's Jack. I think Jack's coming back to give us the hook.
I can't see myself yet.
We can
there
see
I am.
you.
Hi. Gosh, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. I feel like we could listen to both of you for another hour at least. And then after that, we could go for a walk and you could talk more. And then we could just follow you home and listen to you guys talk even more.
We can tuck you in little bunk beds we keep in school rooms.
It's really.
I've got some books to write, but then 2024, I'm pretty much going to be taking a walk around the whole state for a year. Because I'm going to take a year off from the computer. I'm going to do a whole walking book tour from San Diego to Crescent City and back. I'm going to go up the eastern side and down the western side.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody get your boots together and join me for a leg, I
hope that Litquake could be a part of that in some small way.
Oh yeah, it'd be great. Absolutely, Jack. Sure. But if you wanted to be a part of that, or if you just want to email me in general, I keep all my correspondence. And so everybody out there, email me at coyoteandthunder@gmail.com. I'm not guaranteeing any sort of like timely response. I'll get to you eventually, but I really enjoy emails from my readers, and I don't believe the hype. The internet is wonderful on some levels. And frankly, I miss you. I miss the community. Having been on book tour for a couple of years, it's like, now I'm in this liminal virtual space. I'm gonna, pretty quick here, click the leave meeting button and be like, huh. Now, I wish we could all go get a beer together.
I really want to thank both of you on behalf of Litquake and everybody who's watching tonight. Thank you for tuning in, but especially Obi and Leslie. Thank you so much for
thank you, Leslie,
time and for this really intelligent and interesting discussion. I've been scribbling notes the whole time. The book is The Forests of California, but really, if you want to download Obi's brain, there it is. There's the book.
Yeah.
Do you do audiobooks, Obi?
No.
Oh,
do I listen to them?
No, of yourself. I feel like I would listen to you walking around my neighborhood constantly. I mean, I think.
Thank you, brother. Right on.
You're throwing in Herman Melville and all this other stuff. It's really great.
We've got a lot of work to do. We're just getting started.
Right. So if people are interested in watching or rewatching this, it will be on the Litquake Facebook page immediately after we're done here. We've been streaming live there, and it will also be on YouTube in another day or so. So thanks again for watching, everyone. Go buy Obi's book, buy Leslie's books, and we'll see you at some point in the future. And now we get to click that button Obi was talking about.
All righty, friends. Have a good night. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Hunter.